start. Today we're going to talk about the presidents number 2 through 7. We're going to talk about John Adams and how the presidency as well as the United States changed through Andrew Jackson, the first Democratic president. So as we jump into it, when you're finished with your notes, you could rank these presidents based off of how you feel they solved the problems of their time with their proposed solutions. 1 being not so great, and 5 being like they get a gold star because they did a good job. Okay. Presidents are oftentimes rated based off of how well they can solve the problems of their time. So that's how we're going to go through these notes. Number 2, following George Washington, is his vice president, John Adams. He was a major figure in the Revolutionary War. He actually went to go get peace treaties signed by King George III following the Revolutionary War. Okay. All right, here we go. So the problems of John Adams' time are, as well as we could just jump into number 3, Thomas Jefferson's time, is what to do with all of the liberty that has been created by the American Revolution and the new republic. So biggest issues for these guys that is actually going to set these guys against each other is how they view the common person. Okay, should the common person be included in the political sphere, or should the common person be stuck in their farms and working in factories? Okay, so here we go. Let's start talking about John Adams. John Adams' first problems, and these are in part passed down or cautioned by George Washington himself. The first would be party politics. We'll put 1 for party politics. Okay. John Adams' party is the Federalist Party, which wanted a strong federal government, but also the Federalists believed that if you weren't wealthy or you hadn't experienced leadership before, then maybe the government wasn't a place for you to get that experience. So it was not necessarily restrictive, but it did keep a lot of people out of the government. Thomas Jefferson, who believed that you needed a revolution every couple years, Thomas Jefferson was anti-federalist system. He wanted more state power and more local power, and he was the leader of the anti-federalists. If you remember from our notes on the Bill of Rights, it's these two groups that argue back and forth of what rights are going to be to the states and the individual if we have an all-powerful federal government that could resemble the power of a king. Okay, there's one thing that we're going to learn about John Adams. It's that he was always balancing the weight of a king in the back of his mind. And if there's one thing that we're going to learn about Thomas Jefferson is going to be anti-aristocracy, even though he is a very wealthy elite planter. Okay, so first problem is going to be party politics, Federalists and anti-Federalists, and this is going to evolve over the course of these notes. Sorry, I had a hair. Okay, here we go. The second problem that relates to this and is passed on by George Washington is foreign affairs. Okay, and these foreign affairs are going to be an evolution of the French Revolution, who overthrew their monarchy, and it's going to grow into the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon Bonaparte takes over France, and kept simply, he tries to take over the rest of Europe. When he tries to take over the rest of Europe, there's a trade war between French shipping and British shipping, and it brings the rest of the European world in as well. Okay, so they're going to have to choose sides between Britain, which John Adams favors, and France, who Thomas Jefferson is going to favor. We can talk about the French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars first, because that's going to bring John Adams' role as the second president of the United States into the most conflict. Okay, so the French Revolution begins, and in any war causes death. Okay, because you spend money during wars. Okay, because the French were spending money, there was a French minister that believed that the United States could pay for help during the Revolutionary War, and that money was owed back. He took bribes just to be seen by the American ambassadors to France. This all started when France, the French Navy was stealing American ships, claiming that it was owed back to them. The French minister, a guy named Talleyrand, was demanding bribes just to be seen to fix this issue. This is like somebody is bullying you and you need a bribe just to talk to that bully, about what's going on. So this is all going to be known as the XYZ affair. And there's a couple choices that John Adams had. He could try to pay off the debt, but the young United States was never going to be able to do that. He could pay a bribe, but if you want to be seen as an independent country, that's never going to happen. So what he eventually ends up doing to solve the solution to the XYZ affair, and there are a lot of arrows on these notes, but that's okay, was to build warships. And these warships would be protection ships to stop the steal. They would go with American merchant vessels in the Caribbean and in the southern oceans, as well as the Atlantic, and they would be able to protect American merchant vessels. Building ships is very expensive, especially because the United States had actually sold off a lot of their ships from the Revolutionary War, or they just fell into disrepair. So, as this is really expensive, some people started to question and speak out against John Adams' presidency. John Adams believed in a thing called the 5 pillars of aristocracy. You should not be able to lead unless you are in these in these categories. Here's the 5 pillars. Birth, who your parents are matters. Beauty, whether or not you're an ugly person, wealth, talent, and virtue. And sometimes you might see beauty swapped out for status, like job. Okay? These are his arguments for when people are questioning him. He's like, well, do you have these 5 things? If you did, then you'd understand what I'm doing. It's my job to make the hard decisions. Enough people speak out against him, and his own vice president, Thomas Jefferson, speaks out against him, that he passes in 1798 the Alien Sedition Acts. Okay. This allows John Adams and the people in his political party, the Federalists, to be able to put anybody in jail within requirements, 14 years a citizen, and sedition, things that would actually be treasonous. This allows them to put anybody in jail that may try to be doing quotation marks wrong against the United States or wrong against the President of the United States. Okay. This is not very popular because obviously throwing your political opponents in jail would be a bad thing. In the election of 1800, John Adams loses, very much so. He loses to Thomas Jefferson, and Thomas Jefferson wins the quotation marks, because he calls it that, the Revolution of 1800. And it is a good revolution. You've seen one political faction replace another with little to no bloodshed. Like no wars were fought to replace. Okay, so let's talk about the anti-federalist response to people like John Adams throwing people in jail, 5 pillars of aristocracy, and starting a quasi-war with the French. Okay, so Thomas Jefferson's biggest problem that he saw actually had to do with everything that John Adams had done. Okay, and he saw it as John Adams had overinflated the balloon in the growth of the United States. Okay, he saw this as a major problem. Growth of an oppressive federal government. Okay. The best thing to do, since this balloon hasn't been tied off yet, okay, this is his solution, is to actually let some air out. Okay. Here are Thomas Jefferson's solutions to the above problem. Okay. The first would be to try to have peace with France. Okay. We're going to keep it simple notes. Peace with France and Britain. Okay. And his response to this is actually going to be laissez-faire economics. He's going to cut a lot of fees in a hands-off policy. Free market economies can operate without a lot of government interference, and trade with France and Britain, he thought, should operate without a lot of government interference. He cut taxes. And even though it grew the power of the federal government, he doubles the size with the Louisiana Purchase. Now, if you have 2 friends that are arguing and you say, I don't care what you do, but I'll keep on trading with you, eventually you are going to be asked to choose sides. So when Thomas Jefferson believes laissez-faire economics will work, it doesn't, okay? Laissez-faire, or let it be, when your two friends want to harm each other, leads to a continuation of the problems, okay? The British begin seizing American ships, and the French begin stopping American trade to the British. They set up trade blockades against each other to where no products can get in. The British actually have one of the most classic arguments ever when American sailors are sailing for an American merchant ship stopped by the British Navy. They're told, hey, you're in the British Army now. And the British will be like, well, actually, you guys are English because you're speaking the English language. And when the person says no, the British have caught them in a goofy lie. But this angers the Americans. It's eventually going to lead to further issues as the British and French continue to cause drama because of the Napoleonic Wars. But we'll talk about that in a moment, okay? Cutting taxes also cuts the military. Okay, and he cuts almost all federal jobs other than people that have been elected in the legislative branch, the Supreme Court, and the few people in the executive branch, including his cabinet. Okay, all right. His solution to the continuing problems with France and Britain are going to be the Embargo Act. But here's the issue with the Embargo Act. We're going to use the hole punch to draw this. And there's other political cartoons that symbolize the Embargo Act. Okay, this is the United States. The United States is a turtle in its shell. If water is offered here and food is offered here by the British and the French, the United States is going to have to figure out an issue or a way to deal with either of them. And the United States is going to need to be able to deal without hiding in its shell. The Embargo Act of 1807 says stop trade. In a free market economy, if you stop trade, then it causes an economic crash. You could have been up, but now you're going to crash down. And that's not good for any market. I'm going to pause the video for a moment. We will have a next video on James Madison and the War of 1812.